And good evening, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives, and welcome to you if you're on Facebook, if you are on Twitter, or are you on YouTube at McDuff Lives 1. Glad to have you here, and welcome wherever you are. We've got tonight a very exciting trio with David Cranmer, Underdown, Bill Taylor, and myself. And it's always fun to just have a freewheeling discussion and see where it leads. A lot of interesting and important things in the news, and a lot of changes going on in politics, and the war goes on, and many things to talk about. But I thought I would just toss out a bit of a hot potato tonight, just to start things off. If I don't um, miss my mark, I think it's an interesting question that's come up. I'll preface it by this. Along a few years ago, I was really into studying things like the Nazi flying saucers, and the Houndaboo, and the and in Antarctica, and Neuschwabenland, and did the Nazis have a base down there? And you see some graphic images of submarines in these neat little carved out caves, and there's a whole lot of material. It's a great rabbit hole, and it's maybe something to it. But what really was, I think, the most intriguing, that I don't have an answer to yet, was Admiral Byrd. When Admiral Byrd came back and reported in the newspaper in Argentina about how he had been there down into the inside, like the earth, like his plane flew inside of the earth, and he met with the spiritual master, the great master, and it sounded like, this is the Masonic lodge of the world that's down there under the ice in Antarctica. Well, now we have John Kerry talking about how he feels he's at the World Economic Forum, the home of Klaus the Klingon Schwab, talking about having this experience of he's among these select elect humans, that just happen to be in the right place, and it's almost like being an extraterrestrial. and and I'm just sitting here thinking, how many times have I seen, somebody just say, what's really going on in Antarctica? These people, they go down there to visit. Of course, Kerry goes down there to visit. The Pope, not the Catholic Pope, but the Orthodox Pope goes. I mean, the head. Oh, now I'm in trouble. Oh, the senior prelate of the Orthodox Church was down there, I think, a few years ago. Funny stuff goes on, and we don't ever get an explanation. So I thought I'd just see what you guys think. What's really going on in Antarctica, David Cranmer, Underdown?
Well, obviously with Admiral Byrd, that I'm still haven't discovered how Admiral Byrd and Edsel Ford became supposedly best friends, and the Fords financed a lot of his flights down to Antarctica. I know his Ford Trimotor that he flew down there was named Josephine after Edsel's sister, Josephine Ford. And then I also think of Fletcher Prouty talking about the Operation Deep Freeze and flying in the nuclear reactor down to Antarctica during the JFK assassination, which I find to be very intriguing. And then I touched on last time with the German, the Opel being a General Motors asset, and a lot of these people in advanced aviation and propulsion were from this Opel program, like Werner von Braun and Walter Dornberger, these names that we've studied from the paperclip program, but they were Opel employees in Germany. And that was, of course, where like Charles Lindbergh kind of ties into it as well. He had relationships with Ford and General Motors and their aviation. So as far as going down to Antarctica, I was actually just looking at something the other day. As far as before the flights, they were trying to establish the poles and the polarity and setting up. I don't know if it was for setting up like mapping and doing longitudinal studies, but they were doing weather stations in Antarctica and in the North Pole. So it's been an area that I think is, if you're an East India Company person or a Dutch West Indies Company person, you're interested in all the territory of the whole globe, and you want to map it and you want to divide it and monetize it if you can. And I think that's where it all stems from.
Well, I guess about 10 years ago, a huge, what I guess cartoon movie called, what was it about, the Elsa, the Ice Queen from, Frozen. It was called Frozen. It was huge, right?
Mhm.
And it's the theme was, these people, gosh, they've been frozen, and they don't want to be frozen anymore. They want to come out and be in the real world. And all this is when I'm starting to read about this stuff, and I'm thinking, oh, well, this is just, predictive programming for the day that they all come out from under the ice. They're going to say, hi, we're the hidden Nazis that you've heard about, and and we're going to integrate into your society now. Um, okay, well, let's hear from Bill Taylor. What do you think is really going on down there in Antarctica?
I think it was in 2016, a bunch of right after the 2016 election, a bunch of functionaries and important types were going down there. John Kerry was one of them. I'm very suspicious of everything now. I'm pretty much convinced that everything is some sort of manipulative psyop, and from a broad perspective, I think there's the general idea that you could probably control some of these very wealthy people, these uncontrollable people that have too much money to really take orders from maybe the deep state, a CIA or an FBI type or something else. And they're not prone to compromise. Unlike somebody maybe like Bill Gates, but maybe the Elon Musk of the world is does have half a brain and can't be compromised for control. So the UFO knowledge or psyop might be a way to sort of get people to play your game, in that you're holding out the promise of revealing some sort of secret, like they used to do in the 17 and 1800s during seances. If you could sort of convince some tycoon, they call it the potash tycoon, or the person who's supposed to inherit the great tobacco fortune. You can convince them that they could talk to their dead son in the seance, and then you could sort of exert some sort of control over them. This, or have this hidden knowledge. The same thing might be applied to Freemasonry. If you if you do what we tell you, you'll get to the 33rd level, and you'll learn the secrets of the universe. Well, that kind of stuff is not necessarily going to work in the 21st century, or in the late 20th century. But if you can convince these types that we have secret knowledge, secret technology, and secret knowledge about our alien overlords or visitors from outer space, and if you play your cards right, we'll give you access to this technology. You can make a lot of money, but you have to do what we say. And then they kind of get strung along for the for the next 30 or 40 years. And some of this comes from that the Blink 182 singer from the rock band Blink 182, Tom is it DeJong or Tom DeJong, I think it is. He's got lots of money, but he's interested in this whole UFO phenomenon. So you sort of take that interest and turn it into something that works for you. You get him to, basically they got him. He funded a company to look for aliens. And he's been a big influencer in the UFO disclosure space. All right, but suppose there's no UFO. Suppose you're just getting him to sort of corral everybody into this whole idea that disclosure or UFOs are, the secrets of the UFOs will be revealed at some point, or if you're the deep state and things are not going so well, it's the background for your fake alien invasion at some point. You're all building it. I'm not against the idea of aliens visiting, this planet or aliens in general, or UFOs actually existing, UFOs in the form that we understand them to be, that they're unidentified flying objects, maybe visitors from another galaxy or dimension or planet. But I think that the deep state could sort of play on that, and for all we know, the deep state might not know what's going on either with actual UFOs, but they're gonna make it work in their favor, whether if they can't figure it out or exploit it. So they exploit the phenomenon, but without actually ever producing any of the any technology or a less than blurry picture for that matter.
Okay, so you're kind of skeptical about my ice city underneath the South Pole.
It could be that.
I'll get over it. But I love this. These gorgeous, Nordic women all over the place. They're clones. There's thousands of them, Bill. Thousands.
I mean, I'll just pull up something interesting. I wrote about this a while ago. It was the Gibson Island UFO incident, and it was with Julius Amos doing most of the reporting to the Project Blue Book. You could see this is 1952. You could sort of see the development of the UFO story in what he wrote. And one of the earliest reports that he took from Sally Henderson Symington, a neighbor of his on Gibson Island, was that these aircraft were as loud as 1,000 strategic bombers. All right. But now we don't hear that anymore. When people see UFOs, they're not loud at all. They're actually completely quiet. So you can almost see, like, okay, you threw out the strategic bombers. It's loud. So how come people are not looking up in the air if there's 1,000 strategic bombers going by, or the sound of that would alert. So we're gonna have to sort of mold our story going forward. They're silent. They don't make any noise.
Well, I was just figuring if they go, if they're going like really, really fast, right? Then by the time the sonic boom happens, they're 100 million miles away.
From what they knew at the time, it sounded like good, faster than sound aircraft. So he's going to make a sonic boom, but then you got to sort of account for that. So let's see, I would say they're adjusting the story on their next presentation or psyop. And they're going to go with they're completely quiet, and then you don't have to account for any sonic booms.
Well, the reason that I like the hidden master under the ice story is because it gives me another image of the bad guy, the Mr. Big, the one that's really pulling all the strings, the guy that runs, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Bank of they're all just his toys, and he's pulling strings here and there and everywhere. And, he loves it. This is his earth. He owns it. He's the string puller. And I have this picture of this guy. And the reason that it's working for me so much right now is because it seems like, what else can explain this insane behavior? The world is rushing towards World War III. I mean, as fast as it can, and there's no sensible people are going to stand up and stop it. Just like World War II, a lot of people saw it coming, but nobody said, "Hey, maybe we should try another way here." And I feel like the dominoes are lined up, and it's just really, really looks like somebody is, like forcing the hand. And if it's Henry Kissinger, well, Henry Kissinger's answering to somebody. And that's why I get down back to my spiritual master of the universe, calling all the shots from his ice palace.
Yeah, that's exciting. I think it becomes a little more mundane. No, they're definitely wealthy people, but they're not the name brand wealthy people. The I don't know if anybody saw the Bernie Madoff documentary slash drama. It's been on Netflix. I think it's five episodes. It's actually very interesting. But that's been on. It's a good binge watch. But you after watching it, if you're paying attention to this deep state stuff for even half as long as we have been, you get the idea that he was not the top guy making the decisions to create this big giant Ponzi scheme and keep it going for 35 or 40 years. He had 4 backers, okay, that you never hear of, and one of them wound up drowning in his pool at a relatively, I think he was in his 70s. Another fellow who was one of his original backers and took billions out of this Ponzi scheme. Bernie had certainly a very lavish lifestyle, but he wasn't taking billions out for himself. It's these investors, these early investors who got to, if you're going to start a Ponzi scheme, get in early. But these early guys, they took out billions. One of them was Carl Shapiro. I can't think of the other guy's name. There's 3 of them. Carl Shapiro, he was a guy you never heard of before, probably, but he ran a VSF Corp or VFS Corp, I believe it was. And they own Timberland. They own a bunch of name brands. Now they've been around since the early 1900s. All kinds of name brand type clothing and sportswear. I think they might have owned bowling alleys at one point. They might have even owned Jeep at one point, I believe. Anyway, Carl Shapiro, he took billions out. I mean, he wound up his estate wound up giving maybe $2 billion back. But who knows how much the estate took for himself or how much he used up when he was alive. And it was interesting. Carl Shapiro just died last year at the age of 108. So, this the guy's pretty powerful, and he had friends. He's probably very, very close to the top, I would say. To allow this Ponzi scheme to run and be the beneficiary of it and manipulate all the regulators along the way. I mean, I'm sure it's not that hard to bribe the SEC, but to do it for 30 or 40 years, it takes some real influence.
Did he still have all his marbles at 108?
Yeah, 108. I don't know if he had all his marbles, but there's pictures of him. Look like he's 108 is pretty impressive.
It is, but just another thing I was thinking about though recently is that other than the fact that the infant and childhood death was terrible, in the olden days, that if you survived your teens, you were likely to live, unless you were killed in a war or violence. You were likely to live into your 80s or 90s. That's the way it was in the country. And like my mother's heritage, these people, they lived well into their 80s and 90s. And now the life expectancy is going down. It's horrible statistics on autism, by the way. And that ties into the big subject of our most recent, research for the past couple of years of what's really up with vaccines and, how can we deal with the results of what's been going on? It's such a minefield to talk about. Of course, I've lost quite a lot of my work just because of talking about it. And nevertheless, I think the rate of autism among children is so high now that that should be the pandemic that we're talking about. Is what's wrong with all of this what's going on, and it has an awful lot of. It's very coincidentally lined up with the increased amount of vaccinations that children are getting. I just think it's horrible that we're not paying more attention to that problem on top of all the ones that get national attention all the time. But I don't know. Does autism, David, in your life, does it affect you?
Well, I mean, it's not directly. I mean, we had before our family had a dry cleaning business, so we would get to know a lot of people in the community, and there were a lot of really nice families that would have, kids that struggled with that. And it's, again, I haven't really studied the background. Like, I know that that's a lot of what Robert Kennedy Jr. Foundation works on, is trying to understand the background of those types of issues. And again, it's something that I don't feel like I really know. I mean, I obviously hope for good health for everybody, and I do, look at things like, even how we're talking about the, Antarctica and the UFOs, and who's behind that. I mean, I look at the Guggenheim family a lot, because they specifically financed the Goddard, his propulsion program. It was Charles Lindbergh that worked with him. And again, that's one of those great riddles for me, is how Charles Lindbergh, who is, known as being, close with Hermann Göring and the Luftwaffe, and having these relationships with the German, aviation and sort of their wonder weapons program, and then how he partners with this great, powerful Jewish banking family, the Guggenheims, and how they work with this man from Worcester, Mass, that's, interested in rocket propulsion. And they get so into it that they create the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory in Pasadena, California, that becomes Jet Propulsion Lab. And Caltech and JPL sort of lead this, getting into NASA. And a lot of the medical stuff is down in Southern California too, down in San Diego at Salk Institute, and at the Scripps Institute. They really worked on these things, and it does seem like they had, some people working in propulsion, some people working in medical. But yeah, I think that when you have a real powerful financial base like a Guggenheim family, I think they like any investor, they place their bets, they diversify their portfolio, they get into different industries and different businesses. And I don't know. I mean, so that's what I look at. Again, it's hard for me. It's hard for me, because again, like, I mean, we just went on on Martin Luther King Day. I went with my family. We went to the Detroit Institute of Art, and they had they were having the Van Gogh exhibit, which was fantastic. And it was so interesting to see all these Van Gogh paintings. But what the DIA is most famous for is for the Diego Rivera mural of industries. And I've talked about this before with John, because it historically is interesting, because after Diego Rivera completes this master project at Detroit Institute of Art, he goes to the Rockefeller Center and creates the Man at the Crossroads at 30 Rockefeller Center. But the element of Diego Rivera's famous artwork was the Park Davis. In the top corner, they have the Park Davis, the baby that they're giving the vaccinations to.
Yeah.
And
what year is that?
That was in 32 that he completed it. And then 33 he goes to New York to do the Rockefeller Center program, which is removed. They do remove that.
Right.
But
let's just slow down and catch up with some of the many interesting bases you've touched already. And like when we leave with that Park Davis image from Diego Rivera, I'm seeing the hypodermic needle next to the little baby, and thinking, was that predictive programming? Are we now living out this dream that existed that early in the minds of these Guggenheim-related people? And let's get Bill Taylor in on this. And if you wanted to toss anything about, or if you had any comments about autism, Bill, let's give you a chance to toss that in too.
I mean, just in general, I mean, I think I read, I don't know what the numbers are exactly, but if the rate of if the rate of autism in newborn, rate of autism, say in the early 1970s was 1 in 10,000. Now it's like 1 in 185. Not 185,000, but it's like 1 in, let's call it 1 in 200. It's increased like exponentially. And you do see it. I mean, it's I have school age kids, and you certainly see it. And I think that at some point, I think, well, maybe they're trying to mainstream some of these kids more than they would have when I was a kid. But no, I think that the numbers clearly show that there's a higher rate of autism. And I mean, and you see it. Back to my psyop, I seriously think that they're actually trying to kill us or depopulate the planet. There's nothing. It's not by accident. You see strange things like peanut allergies in kids, and it wasn't really something that we had when I was younger. And it's by fiat. These deep staters or government or whoever is running the show convinces doctors that peanut allergies are a hazard. So you're telling your new mothers not to let your kid anywhere near a peanut, and then they never get acclimated to it or adjusted to it when they're very tiny, and they wind up going into anaphylactic shock when they're 7 years old because it's the first time they've ever come into contact with a peanut. I think that's I would say that it's just poor science on the one hand, or I would have said that a couple of years ago, but now I think it's probably deliberate. It's the same thing with keeping everything so sterile. But yeah, autism, I see it. I mean, and just because I have school age kids, and everybody knows a family with an autistic kid, if not 2 or 3.
Yeah, and well, I just wanted to highlight it. I think I did pick it up from Children's Health Defense and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s efforts because I follow them on Twitter, and it is a shocking statistic. I think it's even worse than what you had. Even 1 in 50 I've seen as authoritative, and that's just completely unacceptable, and nobody's trying to figure out why. Except for the people that are doing it on their own, like Children's Health Defense. And I'm really impressed with what he's done with Dr. Fauci, and really support what he's doing. Well, anyway, David had a number of other interesting comments there, and especially with regard to financing and the Guggenheims, and that question it always comes up is, wait a minute. You're saying the Jews were working with these Nazi associated, bad guys and financing them, and what the heck is that all about? Well, we've studied that a bit, the transfer agreement, Edwin Black's book, and the discussion of what appears to have been some Zionist Nazi type agreements as to actually working together to export the Jews from Germany into some as to be yet designated place, possibly a place in Kenya was talked about, but then of course Palestine was the ultimate and probably foreordained answer from the Balfour Declaration of a few years, a couple of decades earlier. So anyway, what we end up with is the fact that the financial side of these transactions often includes wealthy Jewish financiers, and it's just people don't understand. It's like how can that be? And yet there it is. What do you think, Bill? How does that happen, and why does it happen, and why don't people kind of stand up and say, wait a minute, that's not Judaism, that's financing Hitler. Come on.
I mean, I don't know if you read my last piece. It goes right up there, and I think it's very, very interesting and deep. I don't know if you share my screen on there, but
yeah, I'd be happy to.
Is that possible?
Yeah, sure. Let me get it up there. It's D hyphen.
Yeah, the screenshot that I
Oh, you got one for me. Let me
yeah.
go back. Yeah, I can do that. Sure. There you go.
So, Life in a Technocracy, all right, written in 1933 by Harold Loeb.
Oh boy,
Turns
who?
out that his mother is Rose Loeb Guggenheim. So he writes this book. This is the son. All right. It gets deeper and deeper. We don't have enough time to go down this rabbit hole, but this is Meyer Guggenheim's daughter. She married a Loeb, the Loebs of Loeb's Road, not the Loebs of Kuhn Loeb, but the Loebs of both are related to each other, which I learned and figured, but got confirmation on that. So he writes this book in 33, Life in a Technocracy, which is sort of your transhumanist type agenda showing up that early. And actually, one of the more interesting things about the author, Harold Loeb, and the whole idea of these sort of very wealthy Jews financing these I would say, we'll call it technocratic or transhumanist movements. But Harold Loeb was the inspiration for Ernest Hemingway's character, Robert Cohen, in the book The Sun Also Rises. And you almost, if you sort of follow the progression of this Loeb character and Hemingway, who comes out of nowhere. First of all, Loeb introduces, Hemingway was considered an anti-Semite in the 1920s when he was drinking coffee and wine and absinthe in the Parisian bars. He was always considered, sort of course, gruff, but also, a real anti-Semite. But he befriends this Harold Loeb character. He bases the book Robert Cohen on, bases the character Robert Cohen on Harold Loeb. And he sort of, for all of Hemingway's anti-Semitism, it's actually Harold Loeb who introduces Hemingway to a publisher in New York who was willing to accept Hemingway's papers. And the publisher, who's a Jewish publisher, Fleischman, I think was the name. But this anti-Semite gets published by this very wealthy Loeb Guggenheim guy and the guy in the publishing business. And I almost wonder, if they're trying to establish some level of anti-Semitism, introduce it into the culture almost, to be used later, right? Because it doesn't hurt to have an anti-Semite around when people start asking, why the hell are the Guggenheims doing this with the Nazis or funding that, or why is Schiff funding the Bolsheviks, or why are the Rothschilds funding Mussolini and his fascists? Those kind of questions. And actually, the whole Loeb never really becomes a bohemian. He becomes a government, an economist for the U.S. government, and it looks like he's involved. Maybe he writes 2 or 3 novels, but he actually pops up in 1958, which is a big year of anti-Semitism, saying that he wrote a story in one of the, maybe call it Collier's or something, wrote a story about his time with Hemingway and how Hemingway was such an anti-Semite and that they were going to fight about it. And anyway, he's bringing this whole idea of anti-Semitism back into the discourse at a time when there's a bombing of a synagogue in Atlanta. The formation of the American Nazi Party is 1958. The takedown of, I wouldn't say takedown, but the scuttling of Admiral Louis Lichtenstein's confirmation hearings to be U.S. Secretary of Commerce. You have a couple different things all coalescing around this 57, 58, 59. In the anti-Semitism front, the John Birch Society is when is when some break off from that. But this is also the exact time that they're really building the bomb for Israel in the United States at the Apollo plant in Pittsburgh. That's the year that 57 was the year the company was formed that would eventually wind up losing all the uranium to the Mossad. And just to take it back to the very beginning, the first thing that you mentioned was John Kerry. John Kerry's father was brokering heavy water between Norway and Israel in 1958 for their nuclear weapon, for the Israeli nuclear weapons program, which Eisenhower opposed, and of course later Kennedy opposed. But there are ulterior motives for why your Loebs and your Guggenheims, might want to fund these crazy anti-Semite groups. It's happening right now in Ukraine, so it shouldn't be that foreign for people to understand.
Well, that's an excellent point that you just made. It's happening right now in Ukraine, and all of the the tons and tons and tons of money is going through the bankers' hands, and certainly they're making their cut. The idea then that the creation, or at least the reinvigoration and bringing into the media of a anti-Semitic group, noisy, flag waving, and attention getting, provides a foil and a kind of a lightning rod for criticism, to which people who are actually trying to find the facts may find themselves led, and then that becomes a useless rabbit hole, which ends up with just shouting and hate and vitriolic language, which makes the hidden hand even happier, because all of the attention goes to the gossipy stuff. I guess, like I was talking with Harley Schlanger yesterday about how he was speaking of how the English King Henry VII was really did some good stuff, and I said, yeah, but Henry VIII, has covered him up. He's all you talk about is the wives and the machinations of his love life, as opposed to what was really going on politically. And to cover everything up with just something that leads everybody into a speechless kind of anger that doesn't go anywhere. They've mastered that, and the ADL certainly is performing that function. It's also, it seems, when you think about Kanye West recently in his episode, and I think it's just a convenient way to assassinate people's characters. Is once you label them as anti-Semitic, then they themselves, their career is over. That's the way it is right now. Maybe it wasn't for Ernest Hemingway.
No, and I mean, and that he was built up as this anti-Semite. I mean, it's pretty incredible that he was a known anti-Semite in the 1920s.
Well, back then,
that they would promote him. I mean, if it wasn't for Loeb introducing Hemingway to the book publisher in New York, who was also, very influential, then maybe we never hear of Ernest Hemingway. Maybe his stuff really is not that good. It's just the critics that have told us that it is, and our school teachers. It's pretty. It's the writing is very simple.
Well, we all had to read The Old Man and the Sea, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I think it's a cultural crossroads that you have to pass through. Well, David, let's get back to you on this whole thing of the financing, and but really, I mean, Ukraine is a perfect example, and it's over and over and over again. People say, there was it's all fake about the 3 world wars and the letter and the Mazzini and the Pike and all that. That's not real. But hey, we've had two world wars, and it looks like we're heading towards another one. So I haven't written that theory off at all. Well, anyway, how are you reacting to what Bill has been sharing?
Well, I have a lot to a lot to say on this topic. I mean, it ties exactly into what I've said before, especially with the Ford family being so famously cast in that role, even going as far as saying that Henry Ford's portrait hung in Hitler's office and was his idol. Um, we had the Dearborn Independent, which was a newspaper owned by Henry Ford. That was he was writing anti-Semitic articles, and he published a book through it called The International Jew, which was famously criticized. I personally haven't read it, but I do know that within that same Guggenheim group, though, there was Lewis Marshall, Samuel Untermeyer, and Guggenheim had a law firm in New York, and they were the ones that took Henry Ford and the Dearborn Independent to court over that. And again, Ford's interest is so intriguing because he has his relationship with the Russian government as well, with again another Jewish man who built all his factories named Albert Kahn, who was part of an organization called Amtorg, which was licensed to trade with the Russian government, with the communists, and to build factories and industrialize them. The other intrigue is Henry Ford created the Ford Germany factory in 1930 with Konrad Adenauer, the mayor of Cologne, that agreed with him. And then, of course, Konrad Adenauer later famously meets with Natum Goldman, the head of the Swiss Zionist organization, to kind of iron out war reparations for the Germans with Adenauer. So, it's, I mean, even with the Guggenheims were involved with the whole Chicago Tribune and the Tribune Company. I know, like Madeleine Albright married into the Migdal family, which was married into the Guggenheim family, and again, like one of my theories on a lot of this, the creation of Israel, Czechoslovakia was the country that provided arms to Israel in the 48 war, and the man that signed that agreement with them was named Jan Masaryk, and his father was Thomas Masaryk, who was he was the first president of Czechoslovakia. He was very close with a man named Charles Crane from Chicago. His son, Jan, the same guy, married Crane's daughter. And those Masaryks were very tight with Edward Benish, who we've talked about. And I know, and again, I don't know how that didn't communicate that with John, but the Benish that my mom grew up with and was in preschool with, and Vlasov Benish was the father of her friend. His sister is the woman that married Zbigniew Brzezinski. So it's, again, like, I have all these, intrigues on this stuff because Jan Masaryk, Thomas Masaryk, who worked with William Weissman, who was Kuhn and Loeb, and supposedly the head of British intelligence in North America, working with Colonel House in World War I. He worked with Masaryk, but Masaryk was one of the people that claimed that Jewish bankers were controlled media and newspaper, and he was criticized for that. And again, the beginning of, we've talked about the beginning of World War II. John just said that people kind of saw it coming, but nobody did anything. Well, the incident that started it was an invasion by Hitler into Czechoslovakia, and then we've all heard the story of Montague Norman transferring the gold reserves from Czechoslovakia to the Bank of International Settlements, and that, again, being one of these great mysteries, like what happened to the treasuries of these European countries that were, and again, like what we're talking about now with Ukraine. I mean, there's so much, death and destruction that you may not be following, if the treasury's on a train to Basel, Switzerland, and Alan Dulles, counting the gold bars or whatever when it comes in. Like, I don't know. It's so a lot of this stuff is really hard. I mean, I think a lot of it is because a character like a Henry Kissinger was the translator for Alan Dulles. He was at Camp King, where they were, you know, you had your Sidney Gottliebs and your Kurt Bloms that were doing these, you know, horrifying, you know, they called it denazification. And, you know, it was to, you know, straighten out the people that had these, you know, what you and Cameron would say were genetically disposed to be hateful and terrible, and they needed to be corrected using, you know, LSD or shock treatment or starving them or making them not sleep. And, you know, Kissinger was in there for that with the Reinhard Gehlen. You know, he may have just been providing translation services, but he certainly doesn't ever comment on that. You know, here he is, you know, John showed a video of him today talking about Ukraine needing to partner with NATO. So again, it's like I try to look at the whole flight of all this stuff, and you know, I don't look, you know, I obviously don't like worship Kissinger like I think a lot of people in our State Department do. You know, he was the mentor to a lot of our, you know, important diplomats and people that are, you know, have had these important roles. And you know, so it's hard because again, like I feel like you know, this idea that, you know, people are hateful. I take it very personally because again, my grandpa was somebody when he was 14 years old, his dad dies in a ditch. They blamed Henry Ford personally. You know, my great grandma blamed him for his death. And then my grandpa ingested a peanut, collapsed his lung, and had to be in a sanitarium at Lake Saranac in New York, literally directly next to the Knollwood cottage that the Guggenheims and Louis Meyer's Eugene Meyer's sister lived there. You know, there were 6 families. Louis Marshall was there. The Blumenthals were there. I mean, I don't know what happened to my grandpa when he was 14. They said he had to live in an iron lung for 2 years. But, you know, I do think it ties to some of this aviation stuff because, you know, as I've talked about before, the Detroit Aircraft Company was Edsel Ford, Henry Ford, Charles Kettering, William Bushnell Stout, and Alex Dow were the 5 principals of that aviation company, which was Lockheed Martin. And Alex Dow was the mentor of my great-grandfather, the one that died in the ditch. And he was brought over from Cornell. And they lived, you know, they were next door neighbors or whatever. And after he died, the person that bought the house on 100 Underdown Road, directly across from their house, was Edgar Kaiser, the son of Henry Kaiser, that ran Willow Run right after World War II, that did Kaiser Fraser, that industrialized Israel in 1948. So, I mean, I know it's very personal for me, all this stuff, but it's surreal to me going through it all because, you know, so much of the GM, I mean, Bill was talking about the 55, 56, 57 era. That was the new look. That was Charles Wilson from General Motors that literally lived on Lone Pine Road in Bloomfield Hills. That his daughter-in-law was best friends with my step-grandmother, and he was the one that was the Secretary of Defense for that stuff. And you know, so it's hard.
When you say the new look, you're referring to the military doctrine of the new look.
Eisenhower's program. And Dulles comes in, you know, and it was Charlie Wilson, and they're kind of gearing up for the Korean War, and I don't know. So it's again like all these. I just learned last week that Eisenhower's advisor was Comerica Bank's president, which is the Detroit bank that he's the one that sort of helped him put together a cabinet and worked with him when he was at Columbia as the president, and you know, kind of hooked him up. I mean, again, you have to remember General Motors was DuPont, and GM DuPont and Standard of New Jersey were the tetraethylene company. I mean, that again, Charles Kettering, same guy in the Detroit Aircraft Company. He's the one that was to develop tetraethylene and all these things. I mean, he was Delco. I mean, it's crazy. So I don't know. So that's what I think about with it. I mean, it's and again with Richie Boys having their reunion in Farmington Hills, Michigan, is just. I mean, it's like they could pick anywhere in the world, and they pick Farmington Hills, Michigan, for the Ritchie Boys, which was a lot of these translators, you know, same program. It's, I don't know. It's hard to say it out loud, you know, because it feels extremely personal to me. And of course I never, you know, really get validation from people, because most people just have no idea. I mean, I probably just listed so many characters people have never even heard of, unless you really.
That's changing. You know, this is progress, and without you being who you are, where you are, and dedicated to exposing it, we wouldn't have learned any of that stuff. Bill Taylor, I'm sure you were as impressed with what David has put together as I am. It's awesome, and one day I think we're hoping to read a book that you've put some of this together with, David. It's just awesome research, and you know, my condolences for what's happened to your family, but you know, my gratitude for you sharing it. It's an amazing story, and it's real, uh, like I try to do with my family, or at least with my father. It's real, and I hope that helps people to understand, you know, that this is not a conspiracy theory. This stuff is real, and it's affecting our lives in a very, very bad way, and it's just getting worse. So anyway, Bill Taylor, we're getting near the end of the show. So anything else you wanted to bring up, or how'd you like to comment about what David just shared?
Well, you know, I think there's a revival in this sort of lost history or suppressed history. I would say it's probably not lost; it's suppressed, and it's suppressed because if you start actually looking at it closely enough, you get down to a few characters. Maybe it's, you know, the octopus looks absolutely gargantuan, you know, when you don't really know that much, or you just think, you know, this is all so hopeless. We're stuck in this matrix created by this octopus that is massive in size. But really, it's you can start to trace the you know, the origins of this, and sort of maybe get an inkling as to who's in charge now. I mean, I like to find those connections between today's conspiracy and yesterday's conspiracy. You know, if I look at the JFK assassination, or the greatest conspiracy of all time, yeah, I'm constantly finding names that appear in the Warren report or in the files, the FBI files, the CIA files of the Kennedy assassination, that are relevant today. You know, the Murphy family and the Snyder family on the wife's side, they're constantly showing up. I've had a couple more connections. De Blasio family, who ran the op here in the New York City area, the COVID op during the height of the COVID. He was the most panicky and most promotional, but his family shows up at all kinds of different places, from the 1953 Iran coup, JFK assassination, and all the way back to the 1920s with the Creel Committee, and the creation of the you know, the propaganda effort to get the U.S. involved in World War I. But you know, I think if you sort of point to these people and identify them, then at the very least, it's people to avoid. You know, if I ever become president, I know, you know, I'm going to ask for a family tree, and see where it goes, because they seem to, like any crime family would, like they do in the mafia movies. You know, you want to keep things in the family. That's who you trust, your brother and your cousins. So I think these are crime families, and they're just trying to, you know, their one fault is that they've had to keep a lot of this stuff in the family. But by doing it that way, you know, you could also figure out who the family members are, both in the past and up to the present.
When Alan Dulles was offered the job of director of Central Intelligence, I think it was Eisenhower, and he had a condition. He said, "I'll take the job on one condition, and that is that you not vet any of the first so many assistants that I appoint.
Mm-hmm.
Can't vet them at all." And you know, that to me, that idea of a family, or proverbial band of brothers from Shakespeare, is the feeling that the OSS men had amongst themselves, and that brotherhood, sustained itself well into the death of Kennedy and into the 70s in Vietnam and beyond that, and still that connection. I mean, I've been really fascinated with this little book by John Kerner called "Why the CIA Killed JFK and Malcolm X: The Secret Drug Trade in Laos." And this goes along with one of my big themes, and that is that my dad, when he was appointed to be the planner for the special ops at the Pentagon under Saxa, was saddled with the secret war in Laos, which nobody was talking about or able to talk about at the time. And again, the same people that were involved in that, from Blackburn to Bull Simons, these warriors from the old, even from the old Burma mission, they're ending up in the Phoenix program and all kinds of places where the same people are involved again and again and again. This, to me, the theme, it's starting to make the most sense, is that the drug trade that they started and built up in Laos was the big money maker, but also it's not just money. It is the plot to take down America with importing a lot of heroin, and to actually attack us with the way that opium was used to control China in the 19th century, to use heroin and now fentanyl to control America in the 21st century. And they had to have a whole lot of product. And that, I think, is something that they were working on back then, the secret program to generate a huge heroin supply from the Golden Triangle. And that was all shielded by the Vietnam War, which got all the headlines. This guy has done a pretty darn good job of putting together a lot of things that other folks might have missed. The way he ties the death of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Bobby Kennedy into the same theme, and that is that they were attacking the war in Vietnam, and the war in Vietnam was essential for them to keep their main mission going, and that was, according to this theme, the secret drug trade in Laos. So that's where I'm going with a lot of my research, along with digging deeper into the hepatitis B story and where did it come from? How did they decide to work on the vaccines? And the question of whether they're safe now is a huge question. But looking back into my dad's era, was my dad being used as a guinea pig for them to try to create these vaccines as early as 1962 when he was infected? I'm working on that as much as I can. It's like David says, it's very hard for me to work on that subject, but with Nick and Housatonic, Mark, and you guys, I'm making tremendous progress, and hopefully I will have some more to do in regard to writing about my dad when I learn more about the hepatitis B story, which I think is really part of it, along with the war in Laos, the secret war, the secret drug trade. So that's where I'm headed in the next week or so. How about you guys? What's your latest research? And we'll wrap it up with that. Bill Taylor, would you go first?
Well, I did publish a piece on. I put a bunch of my stuff on Substack. I don't charge for it yet. I'm just trying to build a subscription base. It seems easier to sort of get the distribution out than my WordPress site. There's a piece on there about the Loeb, Harold Loeb, and his mother, Rose Guggenheim, and Hemingway, and a plane crash in New Jersey happened in 1970 that killed some very, very wealthy people. One of them was the grandson of the founder of DuPont's gunpowder works, Amory Haskell Jr. was killed in this plane crash, along with Loeb, along with Whalen, which might be Whalen cigars. and along with the uncle of Conan O'Brien's wife. And I'll just leave you with this. Michael Stroke, Uncle Mike, Peter Stroke's uncle Mike, flew for Air America in Laos in the 1960s.
Fabulous.
And I think anytime you get into the opium in Asia, you got to go to AIG, Cornelius van der Star, what's his name? Duncan Lee, who was the lawyer for AIG. Frank Wisner's son becomes a board member for AIG, and then the intrigue of the Hank Greenberg at Yale at the Jackson Global Fellows with David Petraeus and Stanley McChrystal and the Eric Braverman, all being at this Jackson's international school at Yale. And again, that was one of the things that was a suspicion for me, was that this character, William Marshall Key from Washington, Kentucky, that I think is related to my grandpa's family. He was one of the founders of Skull and Bones. He was Alfonso Taft's law partner in Cincinnati. His sister, Elizabeth Key, was the person that Harriet Beecher Stowe visited when she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, based on a slave auction that she saw in Washington, Kentucky. I have these things that just are crazy for me, because like at this art exhibit that we saw, they had the painting that Averell Harriman had dedicated to the National Gallery in DC for Pamela Harriman, next to the Jock Whitney dedicated painting that she was having an affair with in England at the same time she was having an affair with Averell Harriman. And in between was Van Gogh's friend, a woman from South France that was reading the Harriet Beecher Stowe book in the painting. So that's the kind of things that I like, just have these weird things that I tie together now, that I try to, again, like I look at who started the DIA, same people that started the Detroit Athletic Club, and sort of how those roots of all the old Detroit people is always what I look at. Because, that Park Davis, as much as they had had that vaccine baby, they also had the cocaine patent. They were selling cocaine in the early 20th century. They had Aleister Crowley that came to Detroit to synthesize peyote. And so there's just a lot of just kind of weird things there. And then, of course, with Bill's Gibson Island, Harvey Merker, the chief chemist, was the person that fixed up my mom and dad. So it's, and his partner at the Wayne State Library was Neil Gordon, that started the Gordon Research Conferences at Gibson Island. So I don't know. I am very inspired to write the book. I mean, I feel like it's taken me a really long time to really believe this stuff. Cause again, it is like, it's so, to think that it just doesn't make sense to have like somebody that I'm certain is my relative that was a partner with people like Alfonso Taft, and how that key person could have been cut out of it, where they're going to be like, well, what instead we'll have this person write a book about slavery and discrimination based on their experience with, that family member's, visiting that family member. So I don't know. It's hard, it's hard to go through all that stuff, because again, it's like, I just don't feel like my grandfather was filled with hate like that, but that's what I'm discovering, and it's hard.
Well, David, I don't know what to say except for thank you again. Sharing the tough stuff may be more revealing in a sense, because people know it's real. But all of this stuff is real that we talk about, Bill and everybody that shares here at McDuff Lives. This is not comic book stuff. This is real, and that's why we do it. We're revealing stuff about our personal lives that we wouldn't normally do, and that's not because we want the attention at all. It's because we want you to know that this stuff is real. Uh, we do have to keep pulling back the curtain. We have to keep pulling back the layers and exposing it so that the next generations don't suffer under these same horrible programs of fascism and totalitarianism and the what is it, technocracy bill that's an interesting subject right there. We should do a whole night just talking about technocracy and why. That's interesting to me. I mean, I hadn't associated that particularly with Jewish financing before, but now I'm thinking, did that have something to do with, Frankism and the Kabbalah and all of that? Well, we'll have to leave that for another time. All right, Bill Taylor, David Cranmer, down. Thanks again. Thanks everybody. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 11 for some McDuff's Minefields. So hope that'll be interesting. Good night, everyone.
Right.
Good night.